Okay, so when we tried to drag and drop this first image of mine over, we got an error message. And that's because someone actually typed in .jpg after it. And you should never type in markers for files. You should let the computer populate those markers on its own. So how do we creatively problem solve? Well, we're just going to open that image in a new program. Just by double clicking it, we're going to open it in a Mac default image viewing program, which is Preview. And then I am simply going to save it or export it as a new file. So I say File Export. I'm going to rename it just so I can tell the original file from this new file. I'm going to say, Carl reference 1. And sure enough, it wants to save it as a PNG. So this was not a JPEG file. This is what's called a PNG file. I'll just go ahead and change it into a JPEG file. And we'll learn about those in due time. And I want the best quality, of course, and I save it. So notice that it does not need to have a tag after it in order to be readable. But if it has the wrong tag after it, Photoshop will not be able to read it. So my suggestion is just never type in these codes. Let the computer put them in, and it often will. So I'm going to trash this one because it's faulty and use this one instead. Okay, so I drag and drop it in, and you might not notice, but it added it as a new layer. And that's why we want layers open here. It also has this big X across it. This big X across it allows me to do things like rotate it. This is what's called a transform box. Or if I hold down Shift, I can grow it. If I hold down Shift and Option, it will grow from the middle. And changing its size is one way we can manipulate it. So I'm just going to make it look kind of nice within my 11 by 14 canvas. Now, in order to make those changes to actually do the transformation, I have to hit return. And this is called placing the file. And that will get rid of the big X. One opportunity you have to change the rotation and the size of your line art is when you first bring it in. You drag and drop it. It makes a new layer. And before you hit return, you can rotate it. You can scale it up by dragging it from a corner. And if I don't hold down Shift, what happens? It warps, right? But if I hold down Shift, it will lock it to its original proportions.
So when you zoom it out, it won't like the quality?
Don't worry about the quality. The quality is good. Right now, while it's transforming, it looks low quality because it's just previewing it for us. So that's just a memory saving technique of the computer. All right. Now, what if there's something I don't like in the image? Because that's another way of editing, right? Taking away. So for instance, if I zoom in, Command+, I don't like for more step-by-step drawing tutorials, visit. I don't want that in my cartoon glump. So you would think I could just use the eraser and erase, right? But I can't. Say cancel. Or you think I could select around it and delete. Delete, but I can't. So this is an important thing to understand. Because we brought them in from the desktop, this is actually a good thing. They are brought in as what are called smart objects. Raise your hand if you've used a smart object in Photoshop before. So maybe a couple of you. You have to raise them higher because you have big computers in front of you. If you haven't, this is a great thing to have learned. So a smart object in Photoshop is something, a resource that you drag from the desktop into Photoshop. It will show up in your layers with this little icon in the corner. You see how this looks different than your background layer? That's a smart layer. The problem with smart layers is that you cannot edit them. You can change their orientation, but you cannot delete from them or add color to them, right? So I want to delete from it. What can I do? I want to leave it as a smart object. What are the benefits of a smart object? It will always keep the maximum resolution from the source file. So instead of deleting, I am going to use my lasso tool and select around the part of the drawing I want to keep. And then I am going to, I'll just do it this way for you, copy paste it. So if I hit Command C, just like in any program, and then Command V, it will add a new layer that is just that selection. My copy pasted selection is no longer a smart object, and that's what we call rasterizing.
What if it has a watermark?
Exactly. So if it has a watermark, we want to get rid of that watermark.
But I can't cut it out.
I can show you different ways that maybe we can. Or it's a strong enough watermark, you just don't want to use that image.
How do you get the X?
Which is really the whole point of a watermark. So it was a successful watermark. To get the X off when you bring something in, so let me bring another one in, you just hit return. But before you hit return, you have that opportunity to make it bigger or to rotate it, or even, check this out guys, flip it. Ooh. Like a Missy Elliott song.
So, how do you make it transparent? Like, we can see what we're doing.
Yeah, it's not transparent yet, because I want you to deal with each resource individually first.
Well, how do I know?
So once you have them all placed, and I'm almost there, I'm going to go ahead and flip this one. Ooh. You can distort it if you want. If you want even more options, you can right-click within the transform box, and you'll have all these crazy things you can do, like warping it, which you never used to be able to do with smart objects, but with the new version of Photoshop you can. And warping is an amazing tool that we'll learn a lot about with our next exercise. So look what I just did to this My Little Pony. I did cool stuff. Anyway. All right, let me bring my last one in so I can answer the question. So in order to place it, I have to hit return. Now notice, I am placing mine. This is my own taste preference. You can do what you want. It's an exercise. But in order to look kind of the best, I'm trying to keep each thing completely contained so that nothing's running off the edge. And how do I get rid of this stuff if I can't erase it as a smart object? I circle the stuff with my lasso that I want to keep. And I can even take a little bit extra. And then I copy it, Command C, and I paste it, Command V. All of those are under Edit. And what's nice about Photoshop is it shows you what the shortcuts are. Command C is to copy, Command V is to paste. And then I can turn the layer underneath it off with the little eyeball, but not deleting it. Okay, now the question, how do I make them transparent? So how many layers do I have? Well, I've got a lot here because I made copies. But the only layers I have turned on are the ones with the eyeball. So I have that one. 1, 2, 3, 4, and my background. So I'm missing one. What if I want to bring a layer to the top? I can simply click and drag the layer and move it to the top. Like my crab guy here. Move him to the top. Okay, now how do I make them so you can see through them? So you don't have white anymore. This won't be news to all of you, but if it's news to you, this is also a really big thing to learn in Photoshop. Each layer has a viewing mode. Right now, that viewing mode is normal, which means that if it has white, you see white. If it has black, you see black. If it has color, you see color. If I change that viewing mode to multiply, that changes it into a transparent layer where only things that are darker come through. So it's like printing them not on white paper, but printing them on transparency film. And so I'm going to do that for each layer. Change the normal of the layer to multiply. Change the normal of the layer to multiply. Doesn't matter if they're a smart object or not. Change the normal to multiply. All right, and now I have something that looks kind of like Arturo Herrera's stuff. I can make it bigger now if I want. I can zoom in, but there's a lot going on, right? And maybe I don't like all of it. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to transform each layer to try to get a shape I like. Or if there's things I definitely want to delete, like these lines. Remember, I'm using the space bar to move around. I definitely want to get rid of those. But how in the world do I figure out what layer that's on? What do you think? Be creative problem solvers. How can I know which layer that line comes from? Yeah, I mean, I could go through and I can make each one a slightly different opacity as well. And that's another layer feature. So if I make this one, 80% opacity, then it's going to look faint gray. But the easier way is simply to turn the eyeballs on and off, right? And if I turn the eyeball off and that thing I want to affect disappears, well, then I know that's on layer 2. And because I've already copied layer 2, it's what's called a rasterized layer. It allows me to then use the lasso, which is the only other tool I want you to use. I don't even want you to use the eraser yet. I just want you to use the lasso, and then I can hit delete. I can use the lasso. They're like precise scissors. And I hit delete. Okay, now I can also edit from other layers. So if I turn off all of my other layers except for my background white and this top layer, what if I want to delete from this? Well, if you remember from our inspiration, the eyeballs next to each layer. So if I remember my inspiration, professional inspiration from Arturo Herrera, how does he get this to look like Snow White and yet not be immediately recognizable as Snow White? He covers, how does he make Pinocchio not instantly recognizable, but eventually recognizable? How does he make Cinderella, but not obviously Cinderella? So the focal point of figures, if you're doing cartoons, the focal point is the face, right? And what's the focal point of the face? What's the thing you notice first? The eyes. So what you'll notice in Arturo Herrera's work, he never shows you the eyes. And it's especially effective with Snow White here. We see her hair, we see her collar, we see her sleeve, we see her clothes, but because we don't see her face clearly, it takes us a while to recognize it. That's because we process faces in a different part of our brain than anything else. So that's what I'm going to do. And you can do this if you like, and you can even use your tablet for this. I'm going to go through each of my layers, and I am going to circle the eyes. Oh, I got to plug my tablet in. Got unplugged. Circling the eyes with the lasso tool. It's at the top of the toolbar. Third one down. So the lasso tool allows you to be a little bit more precise, but I'm not even going to try to be too precise. I'm just going to circle the eyes and then hit delete. And if it gives me this, it says the smart object is not directly editable, I'm going to say OK, and then I'm going to right-click on the layer and say rasterize it. And that's how you make a smart layer no longer. That's what I'm going to recommend as an edit. That's kind of how. If you undo something, Command Z.
What does it say? It's not directly editable?
So yes, so if that happens, and I'll show you, that's going to happen right here. Let's say I want to get rid of these lines. Because it's a smart object, you can see that little icon in the layer. It's not going to let me do it. So what you do is you right-click on the layer, and you have to say rasterize it. And that makes it not a smart object anymore. You'll see that that little icon in the corner of the layer goes away so that you can delete it.
Okay, so what do we have the last one?
I'm going to come around and help all you guys. Okay? And then if